Alright, so Pivot 1.2 is out for quite a while now. We've been meaning to do this walkthrough earlier, but we've been in the middle of a move. Gone all the way from Malmo up into the archipelago in Gothenburg. It's pretty exciting. But what's also exciting is all these new features. So it's up to Pivot 1.22 now. There was some little quality of life fixes and stuff like that, and I'm just gonna run through all the differences from the 1.1 version, and this was a pretty significant update. First of all, upon popular request, you can now always look at the version number by going into the little menu here, the UI menu. You can see where it says at the bottom here which version you're using. Just handy to have, no pop-up anymore or anything like that, so that's kind of nice. Also in this menu, it's now possible to set a default scale, like an init scale. So which means that every time you load it, it will have this scale setting. So if I wanted to always be the default size, I click this set init. And the next time I load Pivot or like load a new instance, it will have that scale. But of course, per instant, you can also override that and save it. If like you're working with a project with a lot of them and you want them a bit smaller, several tracks, you can do that and save that. But then if you set it back to, for example, large, whoops, that's a little too big, medium, for example, and then press set init, it will then use the initial size for that project too. So it's pretty flexible. Hopefully it just feels natural. But more exciting is new filters. There's a new low pass filter called acid filter. There's a comb filter. There's now a fidelity control of the FM oscillators. You can now use external modulators in the mod matrix, meaning like MIDI sources like MPE, mod wheel, etc. There's a random source added to the mod matrix. And you can now modulate the modulators. And there's a full preset randomizer. So it's kind of a lot of stuff, but I figured we'd start with the filters. Sine wave isn't going to be interesting to filter, so I'm just going to do like a quick saw. I usually just like go for 50 feedback and some level until it looks like a saw wave. So, of course, the filter that's been there since version 1.0 is this morphing at state variable filter, which is very clean. It's a 4-pole filter, which cuts quite a lot of frequency content. It's like pretty steep-ish. I think it fits very well with the cleanliness of FM or whatever. And of course, you can morph between bandpass, low-pass, bandpass, and high-pass. But this button right here has been added, which lets you switch between state variable filter, the morphing filter, the acid filter, and the comb filter. So this update is kind of like about bringing the grit to Pivot, because it's very good at clean sounds. Besides adding the distortion, it's like a very clean sounding synthesizer. And sometimes you want to make it, a little more dirty, so I added some more dirt to stuff. So the acid filter, which changes some of the looks a little bit, is a nonlinear sort of virtual analog filter. Doesn't really simulate any specific type of filter, but it has a drive control and it just sounds pretty gnarly. So if we listen to just like... it immediately has a much more overdriven sound. And if you really crank the resonance, you can really hear those typical squelches. And I'll go mono mode and a little bit of glide. And the drive control controls the amount of drive in the sort of feedback circuit and the overall tone of it, and it can get really sort of nasty. And I think it's, you know, it's of course very easy to demo with like a sawtooth like this because you have all the harmonics and it's quite rich. But I think also on like more traditional FM sounds, I think it sounds quite nice. Like if I do something like a little bit of a... Maybe I'll go poly for this. Element attack. Yeah. So yeah, very classic FM sound, sort of. Do something more like this. Kind of an ugly sound, but hopefully we get the point across, but yeah. So yeah, with like a bit more cleaner input signal like this, you can kind of really hear this sort of the impact of the drive. So yeah, it's pretty gnarly. And it's really fun to just make different kinds of weird in-between analog, FM-ish, whatever. It kind of just opens up more possibilities for doing sort of VA types of sounds. And it's just good for, yeah, either that or like dirtying up classic FM sounds. Just initialize the patch and let's check out the comb filter. So comb filter is a sort of note-tracked delay that feeds the signal forwards or backward, or not backwards per se, but like the feedback path here can be inverted. So if you drag it between 0 and 100, you'll see how it kind of inverts the comb pattern. And this will basically just have different types of overtone patterns in the sound. And you can feedback it quite a bit. And again, I'm going to try with some like fairly high frequency thing like a saw. Depending on the content, it might the sound might be a little lower with the comb filter because it can resonate so much that there is some gain compensation, but it's not always like, doesn't always land depending on the type of sound. But this one is tuned specifically in octaves to make it easy to make sort of like carpless strong stuff. So 0 is sort of like, I think 1 or 2 octaves below bass note, and then 12 is bass note, like an octave above that. So yeah, it's very... So if I, for example, if I keep this at an octave and just resonate it with the saw, not that much happens. But once I start changing the modulation a bit over time, for example, if I want sort of the saw to be a bit more spiky, or maybe more like a bunch of like a noise burst. So now we've kind of made like a Carpus Strong style sound. And what's pretty cool about the comb filter is that it basically filters out the sort of sinusoidal component in the sound, like the bass sine wave that you often have with this type of synth architecture. So you can do these sort of like plucked sounds, and you can also like layer it with some more typical like FM stuff on top. So if I have this, for example, maybe like detune a little bit. It's very like sensitive to different pockets of frequencies and stuff. And then, as I said, so yeah, by sort of slightly detuning the oscillators and the comb, we can get these very strange overtones that sort of evolve a little bit over time. So if I like detune it just a little bit from the bass frequency, I get these like little glitters, and going further. Just an overall really cool effect that you can get a lot of strange sounds out of, but also just really nice musical stuff. As I said, so the feedback in it is bipolar, which means that you can sort of invert the feedback path, and that creates like a different overtone pattern. So if I turn this all the way down to 0 here, see the midpoint, there's basically no feedback. So this controls how much resonance sort of or feedback the filter has. So here will just kind of be like a phasey sound on top of things, and then the more you increase it, it will start to ring out. So on the positive here, it'll be more like sort of like a sawtooth pattern-ish. But if we invert it, it'll be more like a square-ish pattern. And you can also dampen the filter, meaning in the feedback path, it can kind of roll off the high frequencies, and this can be really useful for making a bit more natural sounding decays. Just really cool to make sort of like almost like a physicality to it. Or you can just, you know, keep adding out digital to guitar to everything. Another cool thing is, of course, now it's key tracked here. This little symbol. So it follows along with the keyboard, but you can disable that and go really low, and you will kind of get like a delay. So there's kind of like a free delay in there. Which, you know, I don't know, fun to mess around with. Yeah, just overall really fun to mess with. So both of these filters are only available on the full version of Pivot. Yeah, since 1.2 they're in there. Now it's 1.22. There was some like quality of life updates, etc. But most of the major features were just in the 1.2 version. And this was released a while back, like a month or two. All right, let's reset the patch. So another sound feature that we added was sort of a fidelity control. It's called Crunch. And I was thinking about it. I wanted to put in some sort of like lo-fi mode where it's sort of simulated older FM sounding stuff. But then some people were kind of like, please make it a continuous control. And I was thinking, sure, like it's interesting to think about to make it sort of like you'd be able to like control the fidelity. So it kind of does a lot under the hood. It actually kind of changes how the oscillators, sort of the resolution of the oscillators, also the bit depth and sort of pseudo sample rate, but kind of more trying to do it on sort of like a component level, if you will. And it can be really subtle and really obvious. So I'm just gonna like show like a sine wave. It's this little ball down here. So at max, it's of course really obvious. Just to scale it back. And as you might hear, it's kind of doing these little bounces between resolutions, and it's kind of doing, it has kind of a little bit of a life of its own there when you change the parameter to make smooth transitions, but also make it quite interesting to dial in. It can be quite fun to modulate. And of course this sounds super subtle now, but once you start introducing modulation, you start kind of hearing the crunch. And yeah, just very classic sort of. I personally really like lo-fi FM with like quick envelopes. You get these little like plop sounds. I'm gonna tweak it just to where it's good for bass stuff. And I think there's some like nice presets that make use of this, like the Glow-Fi one is one of my favorites. So this one is kind of modulating the fidelity control, the crunch effect. Which just, I don't know, sounds really good. It's like an interesting, strange thing that wouldn't really happen, but yeah. It's just quite interesting. It just becomes part of the sort of the whole chain of events where the envelopes go into it, the levels, everything kind of gets crunched in the same way, and the oscillators take on these different patterns. And I think hopefully it sounds more excited than just like a sample rate reducer or like a big crusher or something like that. It's a bit more like involved, and I think it kind of sounds like it's part of the synthesis, which I thought was sort of the most important thing, that it should sort of feel part of the synth. Yeah. And I could maybe stay on the sound. I'll make a new sound. Yeah. So the mod page has been updated quite a bit. So the differences is we now can choose between internal and external modulation sources. The idea being that the internal is the envelope and LFOs, while the external are MIDI sources. So you can choose between those by pressing this button here, between int and ext. And as you can see, here's LFO, env, as usual, but then at the bottom here is a new modulation source called rand or random. And this is basically a random source that triggers a new value for every time you press a key. And I mean, the simplest way to illustrate this is just add a little bit into pitch. And maybe a slightly more interesting sound would be good. Stuff like this, maybe. So every time I press a key now, I'll have a slight bit of randomness to it. Or a lot, you know. And I think just a little bit of pitch random can be quite nice. And basically each voice has its own random source. So if you turn that way up and press like a couple of keys, or like the same key, you'll basically get a whole sort of random orchestra happening. And the plus minus sign next to it is the polarity of the random. So right now it's going plus and minus, adding to the value, so the pitch goes up and down, which is very useful for these sort of pitched random stuff. But for some stuff, for example, you just want to add to it. Like if I want the level to be a bit random, maybe I'll switch that off and set some randomness to the level amount. So now every voice will sort of have a random amount of the operator to FM level. For example, if I wanted on the crush effect, just do like a full. Yeah, quite handy. Yeah, but also the external sources. So the internal are all things that are built into Pivot, but there's been a lot of requests for being able to use external like MIDI sources, etc. And we ended up adding most of them that you might want. So of course velocity was in version 1 point, etc., which basically works the same way right now. You just attach it to volume. Maybe you hear me hitting the key harder and harder over here. I have like a MIDI keyboard set up. But there was someone who was like, why doesn't it go negative? And I was like, well, that was kind of a pragmatic choice because velocity sort of attaches, sort of like scales the value, so you can easily add it to volume. So like if you set 100, it will basically map to the velocity. But I was like, I could just invert that. So since 1.2 something and now inverts, can invert the velocity also, just good to know. It's a nice thing. Note is a new modulator, and you can attach that. So it will basically track the MIDI note and add or remove modulation based on that. So for example, if I want a higher note to have less modulation, oops, that was the wrong operator. So I want that to have less modulation. Yeah, stuff like that, or like make the pitch go lower the higher up pitch you go, which so you can make sort of like a weird microtonal thing happening. Yeah, I wouldn't really recommend. Kind of cool though. Yeah, if there's any Alexi Perele fans. Yeah, just really nice to have. And wheel, of course, is the mod wheel. So I could, for example, map that to just modulation depth. Whoops. So to prove this is real, here's my keyboard. And, yeah, just as you'd expect. But the next two ones are a little bit more interesting. Slide and pressure. So this is MPE slide and MPE pressure, meaning that this will be per voice if you use an MPE enabled DAW or control surface, stuff like that. So if I, for example, want to have be able to control, I'm gonna make this a little smaller so I can demo with the MPE editor. So for example, if I want to be able to control the level with the slide, the MPE slide source, I'll just do some random sequence, whatever that will be. That's good enough. And then we gotta open up the MPE editor. And now I can go in and change the slide of this one note, for example. Can go sort of extend that range. Of course, you would have like an overlapping. Oh yeah, and then live, of course, you also need to enable MPE mode. So as you hear, the voice that got the modulation will sort of keep with it, and the other ones just didn't receive anything at all. And then yeah, you can keep going like that. And of course, the MPE pitch bend and stuff like that is already built in and just like kind of does the thing. Yeah. So if you have an MPE controller, which unfortunately I don't have right here, you can sort of map that to everything and just make these really complex, interesting performance patches. Yeah. And new also for the modulation matrix is that the modulators can modulate each other. So for example, if I have an alpha going to pitch, and I want that to sort of fade in, so I would then turn down the level of that, go to envelope 1 here, and then select LFO1 level, and then just apply that with envelope like this, have a little fade in, maybe do an infinite decay release. Yeah. And yeah, you can sort of route them in various weird ways. Not everything will work, of course. Like if you map an LFO to itself, it will just kind of swing into 0 or something like that. But yeah, you can experiment and see what happens with that kind of stuff. Yeah. Right. And last but not least, before you could randomize each row like this, which was quite fun. But on top of that, we've also added that you can randomize the whole patch. So if you press random, it will just generate a totally random thing. It will even do random modulation. It can get quite chaotic, which I think is nice, because like sounds that you would make yourself, it's not really what you might want from a random generator. Of course, sometimes it'll just make normal sounds, but then it'll also make this like alien sounds. Let's see what this is. It's quiet. And of course, it's quite a nice, quite normal sound. Let's see if we can get some. Oh, and it also randomizes like a random name, generates a random name. It's kind of fun like that. Yeah. Yeah. I'll just keep doing this for a while. It's kind of fun. Sithal. Some good names also. Sublow Talk. Kind of sounds Earthbound-like. Yeah, just a really nice source of inspiration. Yeah, and that's kind of it for 1.2 to 1.22. Yeah, this was an update that was mostly focused on adding these sort of functionalities to the mod matrix for more external control, but also adding some significant synthesis stuff that for being able to make like different kinds of sounds and things. And I think especially the comb filter adds a new dimension to where you can make these almost like physical modeling things on top of the FM. It's very interesting. And I know a lot of people enjoy using FM together with that, so I'm happy to be able to bring it. And of course, the acid filter also lets you make sort of like very classic analog squelches. Yeah, and hope you enjoy, and until next time.